Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Janice Fedak. I'm happy to welcome you to the Bureau of Information Resource Management presentation from global thought leader Don Tapscott. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a little issue on logistics. We're going to have a question and answer session after the presentation. Those of you who are sitting at places that have microphones, you can use those for your questions. Just make sure you shut off the microphone afterwards. And those of you who aren't adjacent to a microphone, there's two sitting at the end of those aisles there that you can walk up and ask your questions. And now on to our presentation. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to one of the world's leading authorities on innovation, media, and the economic and social impacts of technology. Don Tapscott has co-authored or authored 14 widely read books on technology, business, and the net generation, including his newest book, Macrowikinomics, Rebooting Business and the World. In 1992, he authored a bestseller called Paradigm Shift. And in 2007, his best-selling management book, Wikinomics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything, was translated into over 25 languages. He has introduced many groundbreaking concepts over the years that are a part of our contemporary understanding. And he is involved extensively in working with government leaders around the world to reinvent government for the digital era and strengthen democratic institutions. He was quoted extensively by Dr. Anne-Marie Slaughter, our former director of the Secretary's Policy and Planning staff, in her famous America's Edge article for Foreign Affairs magazine. Today, his work continues as the chairman of Moxie Insight. He is a member of the World Economic Forum and an adjunct professor of management for the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Mr. Don Tapscott.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And what I'd like to do is to share the results of a multi-million-dollar research project that my company, Moxie Insight, has been conducting. This project is funded by countries and governments from around the world, as well as some private companies. And we've been investigating how the Internet enables us to rethink government, the business of government, and also the nature of governance itself, democracy, and the relationship between citizens and their government. All of you have access to these millions of dollars of research. And you just go on to the department internal portal and search on the following word, Engenera. That's the letter N, G-E-N-E-R-A, Engenera. And it will bring that up for you. Now, yes, Wikinomics was a big book. It was actually the best-selling management book of the year in the United States in 2007. Wikinomics was about the corporation. And we argued that the Internet is not about websites, eyeballs, stickiness, page views, clicks, or .coms, but rather it's a global platform that radically drops transaction and collaboration costs in business. And we argued that this is leading to a profound change in the deep structure and architecture of the corporation, of how we innovate, of how we create goods and services, of how we create wealth and value, and of how companies engage with the rest of the world. A couple of years after the book came out, something happened. We had the meltdown of the global financial system and the rise of the Great Recession. Who would have imagined 3 years ago that a big theme of management books today would be how to save capitalism, or is capitalism even savable? And these books are not being written by radicals, they're being written by people like Matthew Bishop and Michael Green, business editors of The Economist, who've written a book called The Road from Ruin, arguing that we're headed for ruin if we continue the way we're going. Some of you know the New York Times economist, a writer, Paul Krugman, controversial guy. And I've been speaking at the same conferences that he's at, it seems, over the last while. And he gets up and argues that when you have the meltdown of a financial industry, you get a couple of decades of ugliness. Japan had one in 1992, and they're still in a slump. So he says, get ready for 20 years of really lousy economic performance, and that's the good news, because bad things can happen, like one of the European countries defaults on its sovereign debt, the euro crashes, the world goes into a depression. Well, far be it from me to debate with a Nobel Prize-winning economist, but I have a different view. I think that the future is not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future, but to do that we need to understand what the problem is. And the problem doesn't fall within the constraints of traditional economics. This is not a cyclical change that we're going through, it's a secular change. In fact, I would argue to you that we're at a turning point in human history, that many of the institutions that have served us well for decades or longer are now stalled, they're in atrophy, they're frozen, or they're failing. They've taken us forward, and they can no longer advance. Contrasted with that, we have a new communications medium, the Internet, that's enabling us to fundamentally rebuild all these institutions on a very different model and on a new set of principles. And for every failing institution, there are sparkling new initiatives that show the contours of a whole new approach to doing things. This is the topic of my most recent book. It's a sequel to Wikinomics called Macrowikinomics, and I hope that you'll all buy it. In fact, the best way to get this book is in massive volume, okay? In fact, you look like people with friends. Christmas is coming soon. Now, of course, we have an international audience, so I should be using different examples here because this is being broadcast to the posts all around the world. But this book is my life's work, and it's a book that I've wanted to write for a long time. If you think about it, just go through the institutions of contemporary society, and you'll see this contrast between atrophy on the one hand and sparkling rebirth on the other. The corporation, the industrial age, typified by America's greatest company, General Motors. It went bankrupt. The financial services industry, that to me needs a lot more than some new regulation. It needs a whole new modus operandi based on collaboration and transparency and integrity and interdependence. Understanding that business can't succeed in a world that's failing. We have newspapers, 70 of which have gone bankrupt in the last decade in the United States. The old model of the news is just not a viable model anymore. We need to rebuild the way that we inform ourselves as a society. And there's a lot of big promise here and a lot of big peril as well. Our systems for global problem solving, the universities and schools. I mean, the schools, we have the very best model of education that 18th century technology can provide. And in the universities, the smartest kids don't go to lectures. The big thing is to get an A without having ever gone to a lecture. The old model of education is an industrial age model. It's broadcast, based on lectures. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge, you're a student, you're an empty vessel, you don't get ready, here it comes. Well, that model was appropriate for a previous age, but it's not appropriate today. There are better models of pedagogy that are student-focused and collaborative and interactive and highly customized as opposed to one-size-fits-all. So because of that, the university is beginning to lose its monopoly on higher education. I could go on and on. For each of these stalled institutions, we have the contours of a new model. Now, what I'm going to do today is to focus on a couple of these. Right in the center there, one's called government, and the other's called bureaucracy. And I'd like to draw some themes specifically about the State Department. One more contextual thought. I think that if you want to understand what's happening today, you don't go back to 1991 or 1982 or even the Great Depression. You have to go back to a previous period, to agrarian society, where the means of production was called feudalism. And all around the world, we had these agrarian feudal orders. And knowledge was tightly concentrated in tiny oligopolies, and people just didn't know things. There was no concept of progress, for example. You just were born and you died. Things didn't really progress. But along came Johannes Gutenberg with this great invention, the printing press, and people began to have knowledge. And when they did, the institutions of agrarian feudal society appeared to be stalled or failing or in atrophy. It didn't make sense for, say, the church to be responsible for medicine when people had knowledge. It didn't make sense for a bunch of kings and nobles to be running everything. So we had the rise of parliamentary democracy all around the world, brought about through revolutions. I mean, that's essentially what the American Revolution was. A revolution against the old monarchies of the traditional feudal orders to a new industrial democracy. We had the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. We saw the creation of the corporation, the university, the Industrial Revolution, and it was all good. But today, it's come with a cost, and these institutions are stalled. Yet, once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle. And now, we have a new age that we're entering into. It's not an information age, it's an age of networked intelligence. The printing press gave us access to information, to the written word. The printing press enables each of us to be a publisher and a producer. The printing press gave us access to recorded knowledge. The internet gives us access to the knowledge contained in the crania of other people globally on a real-time basis. And there's never been a more exciting time to be alive. Now, here's what I'm going to talk about. Why is all this happening? Then I'd like to discuss what's going on in the Mideast and Northern Africa. I'd like to talk to you about WikiLeaks, new models of government as a platform, a new concept called collaborative democracy, whole new models of global problem solving, and new approaches to work and to management enabled by these new collaborative tools. Together, I think that these will create and enable a fundamental change in the work of the State Department, in the nature of diplomacy, and arguably in the way that you do your work and interact with the rest of the world. So that's a tall order for me to do in the next half hour. Let's get at it. Why is all this happening? Well, first of all, we have a technology revolution. And this is the new web. It's not about websites or eyeballs or stickiness. It's a platform for collaboration. It's rich media. It's geospatial. The location of devices is known to the network. And it integrates with traditional IP. Secondly, or IT. Secondly, we have a new generation of digital natives that are coming into the workforce, the marketplace, into society. They're becoming citizens, and there's no more powerful force to change every institution. Who here has children, grandchildren, nephews, or nieces under the age of 33? Would you put them? Okay, that very prolific group. Well done. If I was in Italy or Japan, it wouldn't, unfortunately, be as good a group as that. But I started studying kids as a generation about 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought, my children are prodigies. And, but then I noticed all their friends were like them. So that was a bad theory. So I started working with about 300 kids, and I wrote this book in 1997. Well, flash forward to today, a couple of years ago. They're not just growing up digital, they've grown up digital, and they're a huge force for change. I'm a digital immigrant, okay? I had to learn the language. Now, just demographically, this is a huge generation. It's called the baby boom echo, the echo of the boom. The boom, bust, and echo, the bust sometimes called Gen X, are the three post-war generations. And you can see this in all kinds of data. This is school enrollment in the United States. Boom, bust, echo. You want to know why the schools are in crisis? This chart's a good place to start. There's a huge wave of young people in the high schools and into the universities now. But we don't get this. You know, we say, whoa, the schools are in crisis. I know. What should we do? I don't know. Why don't we cut back on funding for education? Maybe that'll help. You know, we don't understand this yet. We call this generation the boomlet. It's not a boomlet. The echo is louder than the original boom. Now, based on their demographic muscle alone, these kids are going to dominate the 21st century. There are 80 million of them in the United States, only 78 million baby boomers. And around the world, there's a demographic tsunami that's even more powerful. This is the world map, distorted to show the actual surface area of each country. Okay, it doesn't look like your typical map. This is the actual area of the country. Now, I plugged a different data set into every country. This is the world map according to the number of children between the ages of, or young people, 15 to 30. So you can see the Americas are pretty big. Europe and Japan are small. Japan has a bigger problem than Europe because it has a restrictive immigration policy. And in both Europe and in Japan, there's an emerging talent crisis. But look at Africa and Asia. Unbelievable. Now, of course, this is the first generation to grow up digital, but there is a digital divide. And it's expressed in this distortion of the map. This is the world map according to Internet Access, 2008. But that's changing quite rapidly. And it's changing because of the third screen, right? Television, the computer, now the mobile device. And there are 1 billion people that have come onto the internet in the last decade, and this is growing very, very rapidly, so we can be excited about that. So increasingly, all around the world, we have a generation that's growing up, rather than watching TV like my generation did, is growing up interacting and collaborating. The television may be on, but it's sort of like in the background. It's like music or something like that. Or they have their programs that they'll watch. But my generation came home, we turned on the TV, and we watched it for 24 hours of the week. And that affects brain development. We can talk about this more in the discussion if you'd like. But this is the first time in human history when children are an authority about something really important. Think about that one. When I was 11, I was an authority on model trains. Today, the 11-year-old at the breakfast table is an authority on this digital revolution that's changing business, commerce, government, learning, publishing, entertainment, diplomacy, every institution in society. In the 60s, we had a generation gap, right? Big differences between kids and parents over values and lifestyle. It doesn't exist today. We interviewed 11,000 young people in 10 countries. Kids and parents get along really well today. Look at your iPod and your kid's iPod. There's overlap. My parents didn't even like the Beatles, let alone the Stones. I mean, what we have today is what I call a generation lap, where kids are lapping their parents on the info track. And if you got a teenager in your house, you know what I'm talking about. Who does the systems administration in your home? So this is creating an extraordinary situation. Generation with a whole different culture, with a different modus operandi, powerful force for change. You put that together with the technology revolution, you have a social revolution. There are 600 million people on Facebook, a couple 100 million on Twitter. And this is changing the way that we think about many, many things. One is the way we think about the web. Now, I could show you 50 charts, and I won't, but they all look the same. They all show the old website being eclipsed by the new community. The old one, for you technical people, was based on HTML. The new one is based on XML. The old one thinks the internet is about content. The new one says the internet is about collaboration. The old one built a website. The new one built a vibrant community. The old one said content is king. The new one said context is king. You create a context whereby people self-organize to create their own content. I use the Twitter now as my handle, or as my newspaper, essentially. By the way, those of you who are tweeting, although I know you can't in this room, but for later, I'm at Tapscott on Twitter. But I now log onto Twitter to get my news in the morning, and I've got all my best economics people, my political people I follow, and my science people, my innovation people, and my personal friends, and people who are talking about me. I'm interested in that, and so on. Bleacher Report beats sporting news. So this is a very exciting time, and I'm happy to say that the State Department, rather than being a laggard on this new spirit of collaboration, is actually quite good. Now, it may not feel like that to you, but for sure there's a long way to go. And the rest of this talk, I'm going to push you to think about what you could be doing next. But just, I made a couple of notes here on some of these great initiatives that are sort of in the rubric of democracy. You can be part of this, and you can participate in all of this. Search allows you to find all kinds of critical information, like Enginera, where you can get access to all this research. You know about Diplopedia? 13,000 articles now, 45,000 page views per week. And it's a platform whereby you can not only access knowledge, you can contribute knowledge and share answers before people ask. You've got Communities at State, and this is a forum for state personnel to add value to content through a conversation. We've got the newest initiative. It's called Corridor. This is a secure online environment for professionals within the department, and you can join, connect with colleagues, identify expertise, work in groups, and so on. Think of a LinkedIn for the State Department. Who here is on LinkedIn? Okay, most of you. Well, you now have an internal tool that you can use as well. And the most exciting, certainly one of them that I've seen, is this thing called the Virtual Student Foreign Services. And this is a tool to harness the power of this rising generation of new young diplomats and potential diplomats, allowing U.S. college students to engage with overseas posts and domestic offices through internships, and ultimately this will become a collaborative environment. Right now you can microtask something to a student, but it'll become a collaborative environment internally. This is the kind of thing to be doing. I just understand that one of the big State Department websites was shut down. Actually, that's great, because this is not about websites. This is not a continuation of broadcasting. This is something very new. It's about collaboration. Now, I'll tell you the way that I discovered about the Obama campaign, and it was the first campaign to really embrace collaboration, was about 3 years ago. Somebody sent me an email saying, do you know this guy, Barack Obama? He's trying to get the Democratic nomination. He thinks that your book, Wikinomics, is the key to winning the presidency and changing America. Go to myBarackObama.com. So I went there. There was my book. And it says, we believe in the principles of transparency and the use of the internet in every way possible. And the book by Don Tapscott and Anthony Williams. And he says, I'm asking you to believe not just in my ability to bring about real change in Washington, I'm asking you to believe in yours. And I looked at this thing. Well, my first reaction was, I am the man. But I looked a little further, and not so fast. It turns out I'm not the man, because there was a Wikinomics community, but there was also a Young Firefighters for Obama community and a Single Moms Who Support Daycare for Obama community. He created a platform whereby 35,000 communities self-organized, and that's what brought him to power. I think that was probably as or more important than using the internet to raise money. So now he's attempted to change not just the way that you get elected, but the way that you govern. But that's a much bigger problem and a much bigger challenge, and you don't have control. And to achieve a change like that, he has to be able to change all of you in this massive civil service. And it turns out that there are legacy cultures and attitudes and systems and things that resist change. He's also got to bring about bigger change in the population, because many citizens, especially older ones, are used to the old model of democracy where, you know, I'm a politician, I'm going to broadcast to you for 4 years, then we have an election, then we get to do it all over again. So that leads to an economic revolution. And I don't really have time to talk about this, but the internet is dropping transaction costs so that talent can now be outside the boundaries of a corporation. So if you can create an encyclopedia with 1 million people, it's 10 times bigger than Britannica, it's in 190 languages. According to the big study that's been done, the quality is roughly the same as Britannica. What else could you create? Could you create a computer operating system? Well, the Linux operating system is now the dominant operating system for medium and large computers in the world. It's about to become the dominant operating system for mobile devices. Linux is used in nuclear power plants, and Linux has some big customers. Recently announced 2 big ones, Russia and China. So this is an operating system developed through peer production and peer collaboration. Could you create a physical good this way? The Chinese motorcycle industry is dozens of little companies. They all cooperate together. They meet in tea houses, and on the internet, there's no OEM. There's no Harley Davidson pulling all the strings. This is now the largest motorcycle industry in the world, 1/3 of all motorcycle production, and get ready for the $1,000 car from China using the same model. So these big changes in the private sector with economic new business models are not completely applicable to the public sector, but because the public sector has big differences. You have citizens, for example, which the private sector does not. But there's much that we can learn, and that's part of what we did in this research project. So let's just move to number 2 here, the Wiki Revolutions. A lot of people these days talk about revolutions in this, and revolutions in fashion, and revolutions in that. You know what? There's a revolution in revolutions. Up until 3 months ago, all revolutions throughout history were led by a vanguard. And the vanguard mobilized the masses. Sometimes the masses were ahead of the vanguard, but the vanguard armed the people and helped in the conquest of power. And when the old regime fell, the vanguard was positioned to take power. Well, welcome to the age of Wiki Revolutions. It turns out that the internet not only drops transaction and collaboration costs for wealth creation and for the corporation and for government, it drops the transaction and collaboration costs of dissent and of rebellion. And people, in these cases, young people can come together and they can quickly become a powerful force that brings down a tyrant. So when this happens, however, it happens so quickly without a traditional leadership. There is leadership, but it's changing constantly. The internet doesn't cause the revolution. The revolution is caused by injustice and by unemployment and by people in the region saying, we don't want to be subjects anymore. And the internet did not make the revolution. The revolution was made by people, especially by young people who've had enough. The big expectation between, the big disparity between their expectations and reality just got to be too big. But they were enabled by a new communications medium. And it wasn't just used to organize people, like when are we going to have the protest, or how do we get signs or food to a certain location and so on. It was used as a military tool. In Tunisia, snipers associated with the old regime were murdering unarmed protesters in the street. The kids were being killed. So the kids fought back with the internet. They took their mobile devices, took pictures of the snipers, geolocated them, sent those to friendly military units who came in and took out the snipers. We think of the internet and social media as a way of creating a gardening community or hooking up online. It actually can also be a tool for military action. So there's a big problem, of course, that you know about, which is that the old regime happens fast, there's no leadership prepared to take power. We have forces in the wings that are not secular or the old regime that are best positioned to take power or to win an election, so we need to build up a new leadership. There's a vacuum, and politics abhors a vacuum. So here's a question for you. On each of these, I'm going to pose a big idea. Could the State Department be more active in encouraging the use of the new media, not just to bring down a tyrant, but to build a new government? Could we be doing brainstorms? Could we start to wiki a new constitution that's secular and that's democratic? Could we be using challenges and having electronic town hall meetings and building up our knowledge and sophistication in the civil society, building up our institutions of organization? Because that's what you need to win an election. You do need an organization. This is a time of great peril in the region, but it's a time of great promise. But we need to take the next steps and not approach this problem of nation building in a traditional way. How about transparency and WikiLeaks? Well, of course, you've been deeply embroiled in this whole thing and you care about it a lot. And let me give you a point of view that may be a little different than what you currently have. To be sure, not all government discussions or collaborations should be held in public. It's not in the public interest that that occur. Diplomacy should not be held in the public. To be sure, employees of government agencies should not be violating their confidentiality agreements. But to me, that's not what this is about. WikiLeaks is the tip of the iceberg of a new whole age, an age of transparency, where transparency is a powerful new force. And overall, it's a force that's positive and that's good. Now, yes, thank you very much, Janice. I have written 14 books, but I'm sorry, not all of them were bestsellers. I wrote a book in 1981. It was essentially about the internet, and my mother bought most of those. But this was another book written 10 years ago called The Naked Corporation, and Mom came through for me on that one, too. But what we argued is, and we were looking mainly at corporations, although we did look at governments a bit, but we said, transparency is a new force, and you're going to be naked, because people can scrutinize you like never before. And at their fingertips, they have this powerful tool for finding out what's going on, informing others, and even organizing collective responses. So if you're going to be naked, there are some corollaries from that. One is that fitness is no longer optional. Or if you're going to be naked, you better be buff. Now, this is both a problem because you don't want to be completely naked in terms of diplomacy, because effective diplomacy often happens in secret. But for a lot of countries in the world where they have graft, corruption, patronage, cronyism, and so on, transparency is a force for good, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And it's causing all of us to find new ways of getting buff. So my view is that you can respond to this in different ways. One is that you can just have the status quo. Another is you can hunker down and try and circle the wagons and be more restrictive about what you communicate and what you write down. There's another approach, which is to have a transparency strategy and to open up. We've defaulted towards secrecy in the past. Should we start to think about defaulting towards openness in the future? Now, there can be all kinds of unintended consequences of doing this, which is why you don't want to just open the kimono in a flippant kind of way. You need a strategy. And what we found in the research is that when companies or governments are more open, good things happen. You drop transaction and collaboration costs. You build trust. you build better loyalty. Within a company or organization, you have transparency with employees builds better innovation. This is a force that can be harnessed for good. Now, when I talk about transparency, I'm talking about access to pertinent information. A lot of this stuff released on WikiLeaks was not pertinent. It doesn't help me as a citizen, or it doesn't help us as a society. Pertinent information is information which, as a stakeholder, helps me, or it hurts me if I don't have access to that information. So we need to go through and discern what's pertinent. Furthermore, let's not confuse institutions with people. Right now, there are some who say transparency is an opportunity for governments and companies, and it's also an opportunity for people. See, if we just release all this information about ourselves on Facebook and open up the kimono personally, we'll all be better people, and we won't cheat on our spouses, and we'll conduct our affairs with better values and so on. This is one of the more dangerous ideas that I've heard in a long time. Transparency is an opportunity for institutions and companies and governments. Privacy is an opportunity and obligation for individuals. I am both a transparency advocate and a privacy advocate. And you have a responsibility to protect your privacy and also the privacy of people in your organization. And that's where these two overlap. You see, forced transparency is not always a positive thing because sometimes it undermines the privacy of individuals. This is a complicated topic, and we can come back to it more if you want. Okay, next topic. I'm going to speed up a bit here so we can have time to talk. Government as a platform. Remember I said the internet is enabling a change in the deep structure and architecture of the corporation. And how we innovate and create goods and services. It's also changing the way that we create public value and services. There's a new division of labor that's now possible, where we can create governance webs or networks that involve governments, private companies, civil society organizations, and others, like Neighborhood Knowledge Los Angeles, which is a big partnership to make Los Angeles a better community, all enabled by the internet. Again, at the municipal level, Toronto is releasing all kinds of data, enabling other institutions beyond the municipal government to use that raw data to create new kinds of public value. Everything from fighting crime to fixing potholes in the streets. And of course, there are many open government initiatives within the U.S. federal government. Department of, the White House has its open government initiative, and there are hundreds of projects underway to provide data. And this is something that's very positive, because when you give out data, it's like a form of currency that enables the growth of public value and of all kinds of other things, right up to and including social justice. Collaborative democracy. We have an old model of democracy. It's a good one, sure better than what existed before, where kings and nobles made all the decisions. But these representative institutions had a weak public mandate and inert citizens. And you know what? There's a broad sense among young people today that democracy is broken and deeply flawed. We know that young people all around the world care a lot, but their voting is down because they're not turning to governments as being the institutions which can help solve problems. They're turning to other solutions, including to be in the streets. Could we move to a new model enabled by the internet, characterized by, rather than having inert citizens, where we have a culture of public deliberation and one of active citizenship? Well, again, there are a number of initiatives that are underway, but we need to deepen this and strengthen this dramatically. The U.S. Department of Education using challenges. You know, they're basically glorified contests. Challenges to help encourage people to think about how to solve the problem of education and to come up with new innovative ideas. There are a dozen, at least, different techniques that can be used that we've analyzed and documented as part of the research that we've done for you. One that has yet to be done in the U.S. federal government is what I would call a digital brainstorm. This would be a 3-day conversation where the president, for example, could say, on Monday we're going to start a conversation. It'll last for 3 days. The topic is, pick a topic, jobs or climate change. How can we reduce carbon in the country? And millions of people could become engaged in a conversation now where the best ideas come to the top and where one of the biggest benefits is that initiatives are catalyzed regardless of what the president does or what action he might take. These have been done in the private sector. IBM held a digital brainstorm with 400,000 people to come up with a whole bunch of new ideas. It was called the Innovation Jam. And I'm working actually with the presidents and prime ministers in several other countries that are planning to do something like this. We could do this at the level of the State Department or even within the State Department. Okay, number 6, network models of global problem solving. The world is organized into nation states and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. Although we now have a global economy and we have regional economies, so there will be new transnational organizations and state forms. Europe is an example of that. And right now, Europe is struggling with the fact that Portugal will default on its sovereign debt unless it has a bailout. There's a European economy now. So that's a big change. Now, my view is that we don't only need stronger global institutions, and there certainly will be no global government, again, not in my lifetime, but we need to have new models based on networks of solving global problems. Call them the multi-stakeholder network. Now, I was at Davos about, it would have been 6 or 7 years ago or more, when now Secretary Clinton gave a speech about the 3 pillars of society, and it was a very thoughtful speech. I'd like to argue to you that there's now a 4th one since she gave that speech. Yes, there's the state, and we all know that the state is important. We have the private sector that is now a pillar of society. When you think about our global institutions, they were built, most of them after the end of the Second World War, Bretton Woods, the Marshall Plan, the creation of the UN, the Global Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, the WTO, the World Bank, the IMF. And corporations were not really involved in the creation of these things. These were really governments. Well, you think about the State Department and your goal to have democracy and internet freedom around the world. Who's a great partner? One of them is Google. Google's one of the most important companies in the world fighting for freedom. They're taking on the government of China, and they may be successful. So we now have private companies. Then we have something new. Again, at Bretton Woods, there were no civil society organizations at the table because there weren't any. There were 50 NGOs in the world in 1946. Today, the civil society is a big part of the global economy. And there's now a new pillar, you, the individual, the citizen. There are 200 million of you on Facebook causes. Now, sure, many of them are what Malcolm Gladwell calls slacktivists, right? You go like, and you think that that's changing the world. But tens of millions of them are actually doing things. They're really organizing to bring about change. And it was during the Haitian crisis, some youngsters in Chicago, one young woman actually, who was one of the interns connected to the State Department as part of this internal network, that went on to the Ushahidi network and found a girl buried in the rubble in Haiti. This girl had been there for 5 days, buried under collapsed shopping center. She was dying. She got to her little mobile device. She texted in Creole. These kids in Boston, individuals, translated from Creole to English, found her location, informed the authorities. Her life was saved. So we now have a new interdependence of these pillars of society, and that enables us to solve problems very differently. Here's a youngster named Sean Ahmed, won the Davos debates. It was like, tell us what you'd say to the world leaders if you went to Davos. He won, and he went to Davos this year. He has over 300,000 followers on Twitter. He's an individual, and he's doing amazing work in Bangladesh. He's a pillar of society. So Civil Society 2.0, again, Secretary Clinton put this forward. I wonder, to strengthen the civil society that doesn't currently have access to the internet and to new technologies. How do we solve the problem of climate change? It's this huge problem. Well, these nation states go to Copenhagen or to Cancun. They have great difficulty getting a deal. Meanwhile, there are tens of millions of people organizing on this issue using the internet. New multi-stakeholder networks. The Alliance for Climate Change, founded by Al Gore, as an example. This is the first time in history where the world is being mobilized and we're all on the same side. We've been mobilized around world wars before, but we were on different sides. Now we're all on the same side, and we know that this is a big problem. Of course, there are people who deny it's a problem, but most people understand. And this is, again, the crisis in Darfur community. It's a new multi-stakeholder network, which the State Department was involved in creating, where you can start at a map of the planet Earth and helicopter down into a couple of thousand villages in Darfur and see the devastation that's occurred. You have private companies, photographers, the State Department, civil society organizations involved. The World Economic Forum itself is changing from being a think tank to becoming a do tank. It's got a new network for global risk management, for example. So we need to be open to these new multi-stakeholder networks, new approaches to solving global problems. The final theme is what I would call the Wiki Workplace. The best-selling management book of all time sure wasn't written by me, and it wasn't even written by Peter Drucker. It was written by a guy named Scott Adams. And he kind of nailed it, didn't he? About what's wrong with the old industrial age model of work. How do we get to a new collaborative model? Well, what are the tools that we have? Email. I was interviewing a youngster. I was in front of a large audience, actually, thousands of people. And she was 20 years old. I said to her, so electronic mail, is that a technology you use? And she says, no, email. That's sort of like yesterday's technology. And I said to her, well, if you did use email, what would you use it for? And she said, email, that's sort of like a formal technology, say for sending a thank you letter to one of your friend's parents. That would be a good use of email. Well, if that's what email is, how do we get beyond that? Although you may be a group that is not having a problem of drowning in email. It may be just great for you, but I'm guessing it is not. So this is what replaces email. These new suites of collaborative tools. A profile, like you have in Facebook, an industrial strength social network. It's not Facebook, but these things exist. Blogging, microblogging, wikis, document co-creation, ideation, like brainstorms and challenges and jams and so on. New generation team tools, deliberation. This is collaboration applied to making decisions. Next generation knowledge management. And there are lots of these tools that exist in the marketplace today. Probably the most popular one is called Jive. In full disclosure, I'm associated with a company called Moxie Software that is providing a suite of tools as well called Spaces. And I have a conflict of interest in talking about it, so I won't. But I will say it is very cool to have your ideas turned into software. Beyond knowledge management, the old approach of knowledge management was we get all this knowledge in a container, right, a computer, and then we can access it. No, the most important knowledge is contained in the crania of other people. Knowledge management failed. We need to move to content collaboration. That's the next step. Diplopedia, great example. It's not just about a database of knowledge, it's about the ability to collaborate around knowledge, and I hope that all of you are using that. So that was a fast tour through dozens of projects in a whole bunch of different categories. But I think together you start to get the flavor that this is a time of very profound change in government, in statecraft, in diplomacy, and in the way that we go about creating public value and building a better and more open world. So just to close, this is a great opportunity for all of us. Leadership can come from anywhere. Now, it so happens that in this particular agency, leadership is coming from the very top. That's rare. Leadership is also coming from all kinds of other places with these initiatives that are underway. But each of us can now be a leader. The old model, the great visionary would sell a vision down, Winston Churchill, Lee Iacocca. No. The person at the top can't learn for the organization as a whole anymore. Peter Senge was right when he said that, which is why leadership is each of our personal opportunity, if we will it. You look at all this stuff that's going on, you know, these revolutions and WikiLeaks and everything, and you may think this is a time of great danger, and it is, but fundamentally it's a time of great opportunity. And the difference between door number 1 and door number 2 is you. It's going to be people at all different levels saying, I'm going to use this stuff personally. I'm going to have, say, a reverse mentor, where I'll have a young person mentoring me. I've got 5 people under the age of 25 who are my mentors. 2 of them are teenagers. We have a formal mentoring relationship. And where you say, I'm going to get involved rather than standing back and let this thing being done to me. So I hope you'll find the book helpful, and I'd like to end just with a quick little video that makes a point, if we could just roll that video. What happened was Anthony Williams and I, towards the end of writing Macrowikinomics, we started wondering what would an age of networked intelligence look like. And we ran out of human examples, so we started looking at nature. And we started studying ants and bees and termites and fish, and we came across this thing called the murmuration. Fish come in schools, ants come in colonies, bees come in swarms, sheep come in flocks, starlings come in murmurations. And over the moors of England, in the cold winter nights, the starlings are out during the day, sort of doing their starling thing, foraging for food and so on. And at night they come together and they create this extraordinary, beautiful thing in nature. It's called a murmuration in reference to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And the murmuration has a function. It's not just for show. It protects the birds. You can see on the right there, there's a hawk, a predator, being chased away by the birds. The birds are warmed up for the cold night ahead through all of this activity. And there's an information exchange that's underway. It's kind of a big collaboration. There's a real sense of interdependence, as I was discussing, as somehow the birds behave as if the interests of an individual bird is connected to the interests of the murmuration as a whole. And there's a great sense of integrity that gives the birds courage and great confidence to take on a fearsome predator. And when the moment is right, it's a very spectacular thing that happens. There's no one leader. Leadership changes. And scientists have studied this, have said they've never seen an accident. Well, I look to those kids in Tunisia and Egypt who are risking their lives to bring about a different kind of world. And they're collaborating in a way that's kind of similar to this, aren't they? You know, during the Egypt revolution, many people said Mubarak will hang in there, the kids will eventually go home. And I knew that they wouldn't, because if they did go home, he would hunt them down and kill them. So they had power through their collective knowledge and intelligence and courage. So is this just some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we actually learn something from this? Well, birds are not intelligent. They don't have consciousness. This is a conjoint set of impulses. But humans are intelligent, and we are conscious. Is it possible that we could, through these vast networks of glass and air, go beyond just sharing information and knowledge to develop some kind of collective intelligence or even consciousness that can enable us to attack global problems in a very different way? If we could do this, we could create learning organizations, maybe organizations that are not conscious cannot learn. If we could do this, like those young people did in Northern Africa and in the Middle East, maybe this age of network intelligence could be an age of promise fulfilled, where we could take that second door. It could be an age where peril is unrequited. There was a French pilot from the Second World War, Saint-Exupéry, said we should welcome the future, for soon it will be the past. But we should respect the past, for it was once all that was humanly possible. Is it humanly possible that we could go forward with a very different model of our institutions and of our society? It's something, I don't know, it's something to think about. For sure, the next period will not be boring, so thank you very much. Thank you. I've gone a little long, but I know some of you will have to leave, and we won't take that as an insult. But if any of you would like to hang around and ask some questions and chat a bit, feel free to disagree, question things. Anything is on the table. But if you could turn on your mic or go to a mic, that would be great. Thoughts, questions? Yes.
What do you think that virtual worlds are going to do within this networked collaborative age? Do we need an avatar? Do we need that representation to help us move to this new collective intelligence?
Not necessarily. I mean, everyone knows what an avatar is. It's sort of a virtual representation of yourself. And in some situations, that truly virtual world can be helpful in giving people a certain kind of an anonymity that enables them to express what they're really thinking. These are tactical decisions that you have to make in architecting communities, though. Sometimes it makes sense that people actually use their real names, because when you use your real name, you have your own reputation to defend, and you're less likely to go on a rant, and you're more likely to be thoughtful and to say something that you think is actually defensible. So I'm not really talking about virtual worlds at all here. I'm talking about the real world, enhanced by a new communication medium that enables new business models in the private sector and also new models of how we govern and how we interact with citizens in the future. Other questions? Yes, please.
We have a very difficult environment here for several reasons. Our duty cycle is 24/7, and it's usually 3, 5, and 10 minutes in much of the work we do. And while you aspire to look into maybe a 3, 5, and 10 hour, 3, 5, and 10 day sort of cycle, we come in the morning and there's a fire on your desk and you take care of it. And these collaborative social networking tools, the power is very, very obvious. But I wonder, in your experience, where we not only have this fast duty cycle 24/7 in this environment, but the State Department is sort of at the center of a cosmos in Washington, too, because we try to manage and be a part of interagency collaboration. And we also have this conundrum of open platforms and closed platforms. So I wonder if, in your experience in the business community, can you cite case studies or examples where fast business cycles have been actually improved by quick adaptation of these social networking and open platform tools? Thanks.
Well, it's a very thoughtful question. And what happens, of course, is that when information that used to move around in the form of atoms starts to move around in the form of bits at the speed of light, it holds the potential of dramatically increasing the metabolism of all kinds of business processes and of work. Now, that's both a asset and a liability for you. It's an asset in the sense that surely with information flowing much faster, you can speed up the metabolism of your work and of the things that you do to try and, create a better world. On the other hand, it means that things are going to come at you a lot faster, too. So we need to develop our capacity to function in a real-time world. Let me give you just a very kind of mundane example that's just on my mind, because I was just working on this yesterday with another agency. It's the question of performance evaluation. So young people would come to me and they'd say, how am I doing? And you know those cartoons where you have a bubble and it's what you're really thinking? I would be thinking, didn't we just talk about this yesterday? Could we have discuss this when we have an annual performance review? And it turns out, we're studying these kids, they don't want feedback annually, they want it daily, real time. So, and I thought, well, they have a pathological need for reinforcement. Turns out they're not looking for reinforcement, they're trying to get better. So we have these performance systems and processes that are batch. But there are these new tools. One I discovered called Ripple, R-Y-P-P-L-E, that enables real-time performance evaluation. If there were people here from my company in this audience, I'd go back to my hotel room, log on, and I'd get an evaluation of my talk. So I'm getting better because of this. So that's just a little tiny window into the issue you're raising, that by moving from sort of batch to real-time systems, we can actually have much more manageable environments where a lot more gets done. That's a big, complicated topic. I mean, we could go on about it. Yes, right here.
One of the challenges for the State Department, particularly in multilateral contexts, is that issues are complicated. Could you say something about attention span and media, kind of information overload, and how do we cope with very short attention spans, but issues that have a lot of depth and complexity?
Yeah. Again, this is a very big topic, but for sure there's a lot of information. Eric Schmidt was saying at a conference I was speaking at recently, that the erstwhile CEO of Google, that between the beginning of all time and the year 2003, we created 5 exabytes of recorded information. That's a lot. Okay, exabyte is a quintillion bytes. He said we created 5 exabytes of information in the last 2 days. And 5 years from now, it'll be in the last 2 minutes. So the problem, though, is not really one of information overload. A colleague of mine named Clay Shirky said the real problem is filter under capacity, which is my case to you, to be using these powerful new tools that help us sort stuff out, help us find the right people. Do you find that you spend more of your day looking for stuff? I mean, we should be spending less of our day looking for stuff. And a lot of the problem is that we're looking through emails where, 13 people were copied and we're trying to find, a pertinent piece of information. We now have new tools that can deal with that filter under capacity situation. Now, in terms of attention span, this is a very controversial topic because especially with young people, you come home and you see your 14-year-old and she's sitting there and she's online. She's in 3 different windows. She's listening to MP3 files. She's got maybe a video game going on the side and 3 magazines open, and she's texting and she's doing her homework at the same time. And people say to me, how is this possible that my daughter can get A's and still be doing all these things at once? It turns out that the whole pejorative kind of spin on this generation, that they lack attention span, they have the attention span of a fruit fly, and they're multitasking and they can't do anything right. Well, actually, that's not supported by data. I mean, kids are graduating more than ever before from university. It's never been tougher to get into the best universities. SAT and GMATs are at an all-time high. IQ's been rising year over year. The bottom third is a big problem. They're dropping out of school in the United States. But to blame the internet is sort of like, I don't know, blaming a library for ignorance. There are real problems with the schools. The bottom third are coming to school. They're from single moms, don't have time to talk to the kids because they're working, let alone help them with their homework if they were so inclined. The kids are coming hungry. You got all kinds of other problems. There's an old model of pedagogy. They're bored. We need to reinvent the schools to fix that problem. But it turns out that for most of these kids that have grown up interacting, their brains are actually different. I watch 24 hours a week of TV, or my generation did. These kids watch a lot less TV, and they watch it differently. It's in the background. So during extended adolescence, age 8 to 18, that's when 1/3 of the human brain is built. And how you spend your time determines the wiring of your brain. And if you spend 24 hours a week being the passive recipient of somebody else's video, you get a certain kind of brain. If you spend an equivalent amount of time being the actor, the initiator, the handler, the multitasker, that gives you a different brain as well. Now, I think there's a case to be made that they're not actually multitasking. Gets us to this attention span issue. They have better active working memory and better switching abilities. It looks like they're doing 6 things at once, but they're not. They actually have better attention span to be able to move between activities. I can't read my email and listen to music at the same time, but all of your kids can in this room because their brain is wired differently. Now, having said that, there's a lot we don't know about the brain. And so I answered this question in 2 ways. I talked about it at the institutional level and also at the personal level with young people. But for all of us, maybe we should be all thinking about how to design our brains. We know about brain plasticity, that human brains can change, including the brains of people my age. London taxi drivers have a bigger part of the brain responsible for memory than London bus drivers, because they have to learn all these streets. So why don't we combine brain plasticity with, or use our brain plasticity as a way of building more healthy brains? You know, I've got a whole policy now. I'm going to read an article in the paper or online from the beginning to the end, 3 articles a day, every day, rather than just skimming stuff. I decide there are certain periods when I shut stuff down. There are certain periods where I try and force myself to multitask. I work at it. There are periods of the day where I make a point of remembering facts, because you can't have everything off board. You know, Albert Einstein, when he was asked after an interview for his phone number for a follow-up phone call, he said, sure, no problem, and he looked it up in the phone book. And the journalist said, you're the smartest man in the world and you don't know your own phone number? And he said, I only remember things I can't look up. Well, so is that what we should do? We don't need to know what happened in 1776, or we don't need to know that date because we can look it up. I don't think that's true. I think there's certain things you need to be able to remember. You need to know what a map looks like and where Darfur is or where Tunisia is. So these are all design choices that we make. When I was a kid, my dad didn't have design choices about his brain or his life. You know, there was no, should I be on my BlackBerry at the dinner, or when I come home, should I check my email or go play with Donnie? You know, there was no porn in our town. probably could have bought a Playboy at the local shop, but the shopkeeper would have called up my mother and told her. Now we have this very complicated world where we need to have principles. You know, we got our values from the church every Sunday. Now we have a much more complicated and information-rich and much more real-time world. We need to make real choices about how we design our lives, our time, our families. And if we do that, then I think that we can get control over this thing. I'm sorry, that was a very long answer to a short question. In psychological terms, that's called punishment. It tends to extinguish question-asking behavior. But one more, okay.
Okay. Hi, my name is Marissa Rollins, and one thing that I noticed, especially in the State Department, as probably maybe the youngest person in this room, is that a lot of what you're talking about tends to be siloed knowledge. So we have an Office of Innovative Engagement that solely focuses on social media or engaging differently, or we have the Office of E-Diplomacy that focuses on building software, building platforms that help us internally work. So with that, we also tend to have a lot of single event collaboration. So the State Department hosted the Apps for Africa, and that happened one time, but it's not necessarily evident that that continued community or the continued collaboration to create apps for Africa or for mobile phones exists. So what are the first steps to kind of create this daily interaction and a culture of international public value addition so that people see the State Department as a place that is continuing to support your model there?
Okay, it was, again, a very thoughtful question. Things have to start somewhere, and they're going to start within silos because you do have an organizational chart, like everybody, that de facto has silos in it. But the exciting thing is that we can now have peer collaboration that crosses silos. We have a new generation of young people who knowledge sharing is quite natural for them. We asked these adults to give us a whole bunch of impediments to sharing knowledge, and they gave us a list of a dozen. And then we put those out to the kids, and we said, how would you overcome these impediments? And the kids couldn't answer the question because they couldn't see how these were impediments. Someone says, well, I would never share knowledge with someone I've never met. And a 14-year-old says, well, if you can fall in love with someone you've never met, surely you could share knowledge. Now, there's a side to that that's a little odd, but one kid says, what good is knowledge if you don't share it? Another says, I don't get it. Isn't that what the Internet's all about, is sharing the knowledge? They couldn't answer the question. So that's a real lesson to me about bringing young people in. I mean, it worries me very much that the public service is not hiring enough young people, because in their culture is the new culture of work, the new culture of collaboration, and so on. Now, again, it doesn't mean that old people like me can't do this. Of course we can. But to do it, there are some very, very clear things that must be done. A first one is personal use. Personal use of this technology is a precondition for any kind of comprehension. If you have not used a wiki, you don't really know what it is. You know, I didn't until I used one. Go on to Wikipedia and enter some false information. Go there and, I don't know, say Don Tapscott is the world's leading accordion player, and see what happens. Actually, don't do that, please. But that will get, because I'm not, but that will get fixed very quickly. There'll be all kinds of these active Wikipedians that'll be all over world's leading anything. And then there'll be a bunch of accordion players saying, who the heck is Don Tapscott? He doesn't even have a CD. And that will be fixed pretty fast. Personal use. Have pilots. You've got a whole bunch going. Now the challenge, as you allude to, is to extend them, to systematize them, and to start to build a new kind of collaborative culture quite fundamentally. Give people a license to self-organize. Sure, you want an enterprise-wide strategy at some point, but the way that this starts is by the people at the top saying, you know what, we encourage you to innovate, and you have a license to bring about real change. Find young people. Let them go at it. Empower them. Find the vanguard within the vanguards within the State Department and authorize them to take action. And make good choices on technology. I mean, a thing that I've been very, very strong about in terms of Moxie's own platform is that it's got to be so usable that it's completely intuitive, completely customizable by an end user, and you should never have to look at a manual or get training to be able to use any of this stuff. So these are all the kinds of things that can be done to make the kinds of very deep cultural and systemic changes that you're alluding to. So I'm going to hang around for the rest of the day if any of you want to talk informally, but I certainly wish you Godspeed. Thank you.